Okay, welcome. Welcome to this Conscious Leadership in Action podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Ward, your host. I'm a leadership coach. I'm director at the Global Center for Conscious Leadership and the author of the book, The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership. The title of today's podcast is Cultivating Commitment with Wise Leadership with our guest, Karen Wilhelm Buckley. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
So the purpose of the Conscious Leadership in Action podcasts are to advance conscious leadership for the greater good of humanity. Now, we have a lot of definitions of consciousness, and mindfulness features in many of those definitions. So let's begin with a moment of mindfulness. Just calling on the universe, our higher power, source, spirit, whatever works best for you, to guide our conversation today. So close your eyes if you wish. We're just going to take 3 really deep, calming breaths to bring us present to whatever wants to emerge today. So breathe in through your nose, hold for a second, and breathe out through your mouth. Just 3 deep, calming breaths. Okay, good. So let us meet Karen today. So Karen partners with leaders and organizations to plan and manage complex change. Karen develops wise leaders, and we'll talk about that during our conversation. Wise leaders in her role as executive coach. Karen focuses on authentic dialogue that leads to extraordinary action and pioneers transformational approaches to conscious, wise leadership. Karen also convenes international forums and symposiums as a thought leader and an experienced speaker. And Karen leads an annual Women's Wisdom Retreat in Hawaii, which sounds wonderful. So. Now, Karen and I are both members of the Conscious Leadership Guild, and Karen lives in Mill Valley, California. And we'll share Karen's contact information at the end of our conversation today. So, Karen, thank you. Thank you again for being in conversation with me today.
Absolutely, Paul. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I put some headset in because there was some background noise. I wanted to check and make sure you could still hear me just fine.
I can hear you well, yes. Thank
Good.
you. So let's start. I'll invite you to tell us a little about your own journey to conscious leadership. Where did you begin to explore conscious leadership?
The journey began actually for me quite young because my father grew up through the Western International Hotels until he became managing director of the St. Francis Hotel. So throughout my life, I watched him learning leadership, and I watched him growing from being front desk night manager when I was born to being the managing director of the St. Francis. And I would say that a lot of my awareness of what it was to become a leader and to be a leader and how to do so with both, he has a lot of directness. He's a Marine Sergeant by background, but he also had a lot of kindness, a lot of care for everybody in the hotels. And then I worked in those hotels from the time I was 15 on during the summers. They were my summer jobs. So I learned a tremendous amount there. And then in my early 20s, even though I have my undergraduate degree in teaching, the first place where I worked was sort of a random summer job in a boutique. Turns out I was there for several years because the owners were Tibetan Buddhists who brought discipline, awareness, and a consciousness of choices. They immediately promoted me. I became buyer for the store. At 21, I was traveling to the LA boutique show and making decisions that I needed to be and managing staff, I needed to be conscious in the decisions I was making, and I
Mhm.
needed to provide leadership. It was a very successful boutique for the years that we ran it. Um, and then really over the years, Paul, I kept paying attention to conscious leadership. I was in career development for a number of years. What is it? I would see people with a big sense of vision and a drive to be a conscious leader functioning in an organization that didn't support that,
Mm.
or that actually countermanded that. And their frustration, their uh, challenge of trying to find and remain conscious, remain mindful, remain attentive to the larger picture in the midst of a system that kept reducing it down to black and white or either or choices. And that led me to organization development, which has been my field for over 3 decades.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Thank you. Thank you. And why do you think being a conscious leader really matters today in today's world?
Hmm. Well, there are multiple levels of that. First and foremost, we know that high levels of performance come when a leader is happy, when they're satisfied, when there's a sense of meaning and purpose and vitality. And the amount of consciousness, I believe that the amount of consciousness or awareness, awakeness that we bring to our days, and that when we do fall asleep, when we do get triggered, that amount of consciousness we bring back really matters personally and matters to our families. Globally, given as Greta Thunberg said, our house is on fire,
Mm.
our opportunity to be more conscious in the way we are approaching our own leadership. And I define leadership as the willingness and ability to act on that which matters the most to you.
Mm.
So it's simply the willingness and the ability to act on that which matters the most to you. And when you can make conscious choices, then you're more willing and your ability increases and you're more focused on what matters. So what you do is aligned with your value set, and other people fall right in with that and enjoy it very much.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think we see so much unconscious leadership in the world today. Just if we turn the news on, it's very depressing, but it just see such a lot of unconscious, reactive responses, and it's always good to find those environments where there are more conscious leaders making, as you say, conscious choices. Oh, it's important. Now, you've written and spoken about wise leadership for many years. What do you think is the relationship between wise leadership and conscious leadership?
That's a great question. Conscious to me is when you're awake, you're aware, you're connected in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
So in the here and now, you're in relationship with what's so. And that is a precondition for wise. But it is not sufficient in my way of thinking about it. Wisdom has more to do with a quality of being that, as Robert Sternberg from Yale called it, sagacity, or a certain emotional intelligence, a capacity to somatically be aware and responsive. And wisdom also includes a level of common sense and an integrated knowledge and experience that comes over the years. It may be a fallacy that older people are wiser, because we can see examples where that's not true.
Yes.
But in many instances, there is a certain wisdom that comes with age as well.
Yeah, yeah. So they're complementary in that respect.
Very much, very much. I think they're two parts of one whole rather than being in any way a dialectic.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a great way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of today's conversation is Cultivating Commitment with Wise Leadership. Now, I mean, committing to action is one of the practices in my book with the 10 practices of leading consciously. The title of the book is The Inner Journey to Conscious Leadership. But committing to action is important. And I love the phrase cultivating commitment. So tell us how we can cultivate commitment as conscious leaders.
Well, I recently wrote a blog on the power of the core commitment and using the commitment to orient your days and months and weeks and years. Uh, Unless you are grounded, seated, centered in what matters most to you, your leadership is not employed with as much veracity, as much strength, as much power. And I agree, it is an inner journey. It's constantly an inner journey, and then it's constantly an outer journey as well.
Mm.
So, because if we're only inward, then we're probably up in a cave being a monk. If we're only outward, then we're always interacting with the world. There's not that kind of maturing that occurs internally that you speak about so eloquently. And so the capacity to integrate our experience and our knowledge with our conscious awareness is really key to the capacity to be consciously a leader and to be conscious in your leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that is important. And one of the things I often talk about when we think about commitment is that commitment in itself is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go and take action. We often say,
Absolutely.
I'm committed to doing this. I've decided I'm going to do it. And yet we don't take the action. So
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of cultivating that commitment. It's not just to say, I'm committed,
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate the commitment and then really take the responsible action that delivers the results. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a great way of thinking about commitment, is in a process of cultivation. It's not just
Mm-hmm. It can't just be random or superficial. I would call that more in the realm of a possibility or even a preference.
Yeah.
So we're full of possibilities and preferences. I really, a preference. I want this. It'd be great to lose 20 pounds. I'd like to not eat that ice cream tonight. Whatever those preferences are that we have, even within leadership and management, I'd really love this new product to work. That's great. That's a preference.
Yeah.
But it's a very different place to stand than I am absolutely committed to this new product working.
Yeah.
And that if it doesn't work I'm even more committed to the customer satisfaction. And if that customer is satisfied, then I know more my core commitment to the product is lined up with the purpose it's to fulfill. But if the customer is not satisfied, then I can come back and consciously notice that I have a commitment that isn't reaching the objective I intended. I can renegotiate that agreement with myself and with the others that are involved and form or cultivate the next level of commitment. Because also, commitments are not just individual activities.
Right.
In order to move into concerted action, it's got to be more than just yourself. There's always stakeholders.
Yeah.
There's always impact and unforeseen and foreseen consequences that come out of every commitment when you take action.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like the fact that you brought in knowing where we stand, because I think that's another part of conscious leadership is standing up for the things we really believe in. And so knowing what we stand for is important. And then, sharing that commitment is great.
Yeah. One other thing about commitment to me is that when commitment is paired with wisdom, there's a certain awareness of both the limits of the reliability of our own knowledge. So I might commit to the success of my company or my team, but if I'm consciously aware that there are limits to my own knowledge, then I'm wiser rather than bullheaded about the commitment. And the second part to that is the wisdom comes when we're aware of the inherent dilemmas that come within acting on any commitment. So there's always negative polarities. There's ways that there's two choices to make that don't necessarily seem to go together. and an ability to be aware of those dilemmas, and the fact that we have ill-structured problems, we have messes that we're dealing with that are much more complex than we can possibly come to understand. That awareness as well is wisdom.
Yes, yes, very good. Thank you. Now, you mentioned your blog just a moment ago, and you've a recent blog post you wrote about the gift of pause. And we started with a moment of mindfulness. I often talk about a purposeful pause. So this idea of the gift of pause is important. What does that mean for you?
Well, as I said in the blog, we pay more attention in a pendulum. We pay a lot of attention to the momentum that happens in that movement. In performance reviews, people are judged on how much they move, on how fast they're going, on how much they accomplish. We get to the end of the day and we very seldom write in our summary of the day, I really paused today. I heard something different. I took in some information I hadn't considered before. And what I like to speak about is that the pendulum is the kinetic energy. When the pendulum gets up to the top, just before it turns and goes back down, is the place where it actually gathers potential energy. And it's where it has the most potential energy. So I spoke in the blog about walking into a meeting, how you pause before you open the door gives you an opportunity to get increase your relationship with your commitment and with what's so in the environment. So you're not walking in trying to act as though these certain conditions don't exist, or you're able to make better decisions. You're able to move with more responsiveness to changing conditions.
Yeah, I love the idea that as you pause as you go into the meeting, or before you leave your office to go down the hall to the next meeting. And we can take that a step further, which I often do in meetings and even with my leadership coaching, to start a meeting or a coaching session with just that moment of mindfulness, that pause, which just allows people who are busy, rushing from one meeting to another, just to catch breath and just become centered and ready for what's happening in that meeting. Because often if we just rush in and get started straight into the agenda, we're still thinking about what we were doing just now. We're not ready. And so this whole idea of the gift of pause, I think, is extremely valuable for us as individuals, but also in our teams.
Yes, I appreciate that, Paul, and I agree. The ordinariness of asking for a pause. I recently had someone, actually at the Conscious Leadership Guild, he said, well, I don't know yet that I have the safety to ask people to pause in the meeting. And I said, well, don't make it ooey gooey, make it ordinary. I walk into the meeting and I say, I can see that we've all been rushing to get here. Let's take 30 seconds to pause and gather our thoughts and focus the agenda in our minds.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say. And then you shut up and you let everybody settle in the silence so that they become present to themselves and each other. Then you've got a mindful quality, and it's not taking 20 minutes for somebody to truly end the conversation that was going on out in the hall.
Yeah.
They bring their best self. You can have shorter meetings that way.
That's right. Yes, just simply taking a breath can help all of our tensions, if you like. Great. Oh, that's good. I like the whole idea of a purposeful pause or gift of pause. So that's good. Now, we're talking about conscious leadership. What do you see as the dimensions of conscious leadership?
Well, I speak about the inner realm of developing your ability to be conscious, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a lifelong practice. It's certainly, there is no point where we become conscious. It is not a fixed state. Conscious is not a fixed state, nor is it a state of perfection. Conscious is an opportunity on an ongoing basis to notice, yesterday I was on a call. I saw somebody on the Zoom get triggered. I said, her jaw tightened. I noticed. My first step is to notice that I have filters, that I have ways I'm perceiving, narratives that I use on a regular basis. So I said, look, I wonder what's going on with her. I wonder if there's something that I said. So my narrative was, it might be my fault, whatever happened. And then I said, but what did I actually notice? I noticed that her jaw got tight. So then once I noticed that her jaw got tight, I could notice that I was still relaxed and centered. And so I simply observed from there and could make a choice to be present with her, and perhaps even to ask a question later on that would encourage her to speak back to that point where we were. And I discovered something completely unrelated to anything we'd been talking about. But had I made that story up about it being me, I would have lost my consciousness of that conversation in that moment. And that's the inner realm. And then there's the realm of connectedness. And the Buddhists speak about that we're intrinsically connected with one another and with all of life. And part of why the earth is the degradation of soils, the amount of plastics and warming in the ocean, I can go on and on and on. Is because we haven't lived from the place of being connected with the earth and connected with each other and connected with all of life. I've had an opportunity to swim with the dolphins. And I'll tell you, when that dolphin comes up right next to me and looks me in the eye, I'm looking in the eye of a peer. I'm not looking in the eye of some silly creature that does flips for the circus. I'm looking in the eyes of real intelligence. And so that interconnectedness is the next realm of conscious leadership. And the third to me is the transpersonal, where we are awake and aware, as you said at the very beginning of this, we're awake and aware to the forces that are beyond our knowing, to that which is what Carlos Castaneda called the non-ordinary reality. And being able to hold the three of those simultaneously so that we're consciously aware of ourselves, we're aware that we're in a regenerative, interconnected relationship, and we're aware of the transpersonal, where, as one leader recently said to me when he reached a real breakthrough moment, he said, I think I finally know that I don't know what I don't know.
Yes.
And there's a tremendous amount that falls within that realm of what we don't know. And we're constantly emerging, and we can emerge or evolve into that either consciously or unconsciously. We can stumble our way through it, or we can pay attention and open the opportunity for pause. So we take a breath and we notice what's emerging and what is coming forward, and we can nurture that and appreciate it. Appreciating what works, of course, gives us a foundation of strength from which we can do anything.
Yes, I think this whole idea of beginning with noticing is important. And I noticed what you were talking about of you notice what your reaction is. You notice what's going on inside of you. We notice what's going on inside of others. We notice the environment we're in, whether that's a meeting or in the planet that we live. And by noticing, we can then start to set intention as to how we want to show up in the world. So that it all starts with being aware. I often use those three letters, AIA: awareness, intention, action.
Very nice. Very nice.
It starts with awareness. It starts with noticing.
And that may be the place where the gradations of consciousness come in, is how much we notice and what we notice. Because some people notice visually, some people are auditory, some people kinesthetic, but that whole somatic awareness and fine-tuning our somatic awareness. The somatic includes the feelings, the body, the environment, all of it, the mind, begins to integrate the mind and the emotions and the spirit. then we've got more consciousness that we're bringing to whatever we do. And when I'm working with coaching or with consulting in a change project, that's really what I'm doing, because I'm not the expert to tell them what they should do in their organization, even though I've been doing this for decades. I have a lot of knowledge and experience, but it's their organization, it's their mission that they are personally driving.
Yeah.
And what I do is work with them so that they can increase that noticing. They can increase the data set that they have available, and reduce their reactions so that they actually have the freedom to fully engage, to get out of their own way and to fully show up and engage with whatever they're doing.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a great description. Now, just looking on the other side, what do you think is the biggest challenge to leading consciously?
I think it's that difficulty that we all have of the simultaneity of being conscious and unconscious. It's that we have the many different dimensions that make us up as human beings. And to simultaneously be aware of what's going on in my mind, what I'm thinking about, the thoughts I'm forming or shaping, what's going on in my spirit, what is bringing me alive, what's giving me juice, life force. I just published a blog on life force. And when I was on the board for Spirit and Business Global Institute, we spoke a lot about what is the spirit that comes alive inside of a business. And how do we cultivate that? And we had companies from all over the world that were bringing their examples of cultivating spirit in their business, in their organization. And then there's the basic, living an everyday life consciously. And so trying to hold all of that at the same time, I think, is the biggest challenge. Because when we lose, I told you I recently broke a little bone in my toe. Well, it was a moment of unconsciousness.
Yeah.
It was a moment of rushing about without having really given my attention to where I was. I was really ahead of my body. I was not in myself. I was not centered. And I got feedback.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's sometimes we have to slow down. I mean, that's we often use that phrase, slow down to speed up. And I think slowing down gives us the chance to observe and notice and decide then what to do and how to do it. Stay inside of ourselves. Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of interesting ground already, but we're coming to the end of our time together. You have one piece of wisdom for our aspiring conscious leaders listening to the podcast today?
Oh, such a great question. I would quote Robert Sternberg, if I may, and then follow that up with a point of my own. He's a professor at Yale University. He says, if there's anything the world needs, it is wisdom. Without it, I exaggerate not at all in saying that very soon there may be no world, or at least none with humans populating it. And Dr. Sternberg wrote that in 2003 in his book, Wisdom, Intelligence, and Creativity Synthesized. And I, too, concur with that. This is a critical time for humanity. And our collective wisdom is urgently, urgently needed. And yet it's not at the forefront of our economic or political or even sometimes personal approaches to the way we live and the way we work. And consciousness and wisdom can be cultivated and developed in ourselves and in others. And putting our time and attention to cultivating wisdom, to cultivating an ability to be conscious of what's so, it builds when we are able to take the time and understand how we are already wise. Looking at how we are already wise and how we are already conscious is a practice that I would recommend for anyone, since I think all of us are aspiring conscious leaders. There's never a point where we become a conscious leader. We're always working to develop that integrated wisdom that will enable us to consciously envision and build the kind of sustainable world and successful business that we most want.
Yes, thank you. And I love this word cultivate. because I think that's been a little bit of a theme. I know we had it in the title, but I like the idea of cultivate. It brings us back to plant life, how plants grow, and how we work in our gardens. And cultivating is not something we do instantaneously. It's a process.
No.
It takes time. It requires us to pay attention, to water the plants, to remove the weeds, to do all those things. And so this whole idea of cultivating, I think, is a great way of considering conscious leadership. So thank you for bringing that up today. I think it's a very powerful thought for us.
You're welcome. I don't think we've thought about cultivation as a skill of leadership, and it's part of where it's very important to integrate feminine wisdom and masculine.
Yes, I agree with that too. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we share our contact information. So Karen, tell us how our listeners can best get in touch with you and learn more about what you do.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love you to come visit my website, communicoreconsulting.com, and the contact information is certainly there. And please come on over to my blog. I'm publishing something new, posting something new every 2 weeks or so, and it ranges from building life force in meetings to consciously pausing, cultivating the gifts of the pause this time of year, to my thoughts on leadership, and or connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know this is where you got an opportunity to meet Paul and to meet me. I'd love to know.
Very good. Thank you very much. And it's really been great to have our conversation today. I'm really pleased. We only met, a few months ago now, but really enjoyed our conversation. So we talked about cultivating, and I think that's a great word to take away. But the whole idea of raising our consciousness, reaching for higher levels of consciousness is really important. For me, what I find with clients is that if they have higher consciousness, they have higher confidence. And with higher confidence can come with higher performance. But it starts with that being conscious. So that's important. So for those listening, I hope you'll be able to live and lead more consciously as a result of our conversation today. And I encourage you to aspire to be a more wise and more conscious leader. So please be on the lookout for new podcasts with me in conversation with leaders in the field of conscious leadership. Share the link to this podcast with friends and colleagues. And please write with your questions and comments. You can always reach me. The email is on the screen for those of you who are just listening on the audio stream, paulw@drpaulward.com. Always reach me there, and you can find more about the book, The Inner Journey of Conscious Leadership, at the website, www.theconsciousleadershipbook.com, and there's a contact page there too. So look out for new podcasts, and I will be posting those very soon. And I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you again, Karen. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Paul.